if you can.
880, what is it?
880. So we're continuing to learn the Maimer Basi Lagani Tafshin Mem Gimmel, which is Miyusid on the 13th Perek of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Hemshech Basi Lagani. And 2 weeks ago, we began the Maimer. So to give a short recap, to sort of get us in the zone of what's going on over here. So all the Basi Lagani Mamarim, more or less, the Rebbe begins them with the same way, where the Rebbe gives a general overview of the big picture of his Havas Eilumis. Why are the worlds here? Why are we here? What are we expected to do? So it's a very geschmack azach to see time and again, and it never gets you never get tired of it. So the Maimer Basi Lagani is miyusid. The Dibra Maschil is from the Medrash, where the Medrash says Basi Lagani, that the Eibishter says, or it's the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, where the Eibishter says Basi Lagani Achesi Kala. Then when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis Hamikdash, so on this the Eibishter said Basi Lagani Achesi Kala, I came to my garden, to my beloved, to my bride. Yeah, that's the Taich Le'erech. And the Medrash asks on this, why does it say Lagani? It should have said Lagan. Basi Lagani came to the garden. So Lagani, this symbolizes that this place where the Eibishter came to when the Beis Hamikdash was created, it wasn't something new. It's Be'etzem Lagani. Elam Haza Hatacht in the physical world is really the place where the Eibishter Shechina was in the beginning of time. It's not a Naya Maisa. It's not a contradiction to the world. It's not a new vert in the world. Be'emes, the world is Gani. The world is the Eibishter's playground, so to speak. The place where the Eibishter goes is pleasure garden, whichever way you want to touch it, is chuppah house. This is the place where the Eibishter loves to be. However, immediately at the beginning of the world, the Eibishter Shechina had to leave. Kivyachol, the Eibishter had to leave. Moving, it's all part of the Eibishter's plan. The Eibishter Shechina had to leave. Why? Because there were different averis that changed the nature of the world from what it's really supposed to be, and turned it into a place where you have klippos. And not only that, the klippos are the more powerful force in a way in the world. And the Shechina was pushed away more distant and more distant until you had 7 great tzaddikim that came up with the Shechina all the way back down into this world. The progression of tzaddikim started with Avraham Avinu. They brought the Shechina, beginning with Avraham Avinu, they brought the Shechina closer to the world. But Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who actually brought the Shechina, the Peil Mamish, into this world. Down here on earth, in this physical universe, Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who did that. Why? What's the bigger picture? What's Kilu, the overarching idea over here in the Eibishter Shechina being in this world? So it says, Chassidus discusses it at length in many, many places, that Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu Leis Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim, that the Eibishter has a taiva. The Eibishter has something that he wants. And like the Alter Rebbe famously said, if a taiva is kenkashenish. It's something, in other words, that's beyond understanding. It's something that the Eibishter wants. And when we say it's beyond understanding, what we mean to say is that it reaches to the depths of the Eibishter, that the Eibishter wants to have a dira, a dwelling place, his home, the place that's for him, that's his area, should be dafke in this kashmistic physical world. And that's where we see that Moshe Rabbeinu, whose job was to bring the Shechina down into this world, what did he do? One of the main things that he did is he built the Mishkan. He built the Mishkan. And we see this idea of Dir B'Tachtenim in the Mishkan. That we see that the Mishkan was made of krashim and atzei shittim. How does krashim and atzei shittim point to the idea of Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu Leis Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim? So we have to start taking apart the Maimer Chazal. Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu Leis Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim. That what are we talking about? We're talking about Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we're talking about the type of the Eibishter. In other words, the Atzmus itself. The Atzmus itself wants to be where? In a Dir B'Tachtenim, in a world that's called a Tachtim, in a lowly world. So this world, the Eibishter, made it to be a very lowly place. After the Chet, it became a very lowly place. Why? Because otherwise the Eibishter can't have his taiva. If the taiva of the Eibishter is a Dir B'Tachtenim, so there must be a Tachtim. If there's no Tachtim, the Eibishter could write it. He could have a dir with the Malachim, he could have a dir with the Neshamas of the Tzaddikim, he could have a dir in the Ilmis Elyonim, but he can't have a din in the Tachtenim. For the Eibishter to have a din in the Tachtenim, there has to be a place that's a Tachten. Was is Pshat a Tachten? That it's a world that's full of sheker and full of shtus. It's a world that's full of lie and deceit. What's the lie and deceit of the world? To say that the Eibishter isn't here. There is no Eibishter, Chas v'shalom. To deny the existence of the Eibishter. And to be full of shtus of the Yetzer Hara, of the Lu'umas, that causes a person to veer far away from the Eibishter. And in this world, Dafka, the Yid comes and he transforms it. He turns it into a place that instead of sheker, you have keresh, you have the beams, the planks of wood that the Mishkan was constructed out of, and instead of the shtus d'lumazeh, you have atzei shitim oimdim, you have the shtus d'ktusha, through which you have the wood that the planks were made out of. In other words, you transform this world into a world that's for the Eibishter. And that's the idea of bringing Mashiach. If you think about it, right, what's the general outline of Mashiach? That there is a situation of Galus where the furthest possible away from the Savakadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim, the Eibishter is Kiviyachol very far away from this world, and then many years pass, and through the Aveda of Yidden, through the work of Yidden over the course of many, many years, so then the Eibishter is revealed again in this world, right? If you try to reconcile that with what's actually happening, then you have to properly understand what Mashiach is, otherwise you're going to have a very big question. What the work of bringing Mashiach is, otherwise you're going to have a very big question. What do we understand? We understand that the Eibishter is very holy, and he wants his holiness to be here. That's the way we understand it initially. So what would you expect? You would expect that the more time we are in Galus, the bigger tzaddikim we have around. And we have to bring down the greatest level of holiness into this world. So you would expect to see that it's like a child growing up. In the beginning, he's a small child. He can't do much. He's not very smart. His emotions aren't developed, his skills, his capabilities. And then as he grows up, he becomes more and more of a person until he becomes like Greis Chachem, v'chulu v'chulu. And then he could reach the ultimate level of what it means to be a person. It's a story of growth. But what do you see is happening with Pilam Shingalus? And it's not because the Goyim made it that way, Chas v'shalom. It's not because we made it that way, Chas v'shalom. Nobody has a say in what happens in this world. It's all the Eibishter's plan. It's all the Eibishter's design. And with Pilam Mamish, what's happening in this world, through the progression of Galus, then instead of becoming bigger tzaddikim, we're becoming smaller tzaddikim. The Deis, you have the concept of Yeridas HaDeis, and the more time we spend in Galus, the lower we stumble, the lower we fall, the less holy we become. So you have to ask yourself, what's the story over here then? There's something missing to our general picture of what we're supposed to be and and how we're supposed to do it. Something isn't adding up. But if you understand the word of Dir B'Tachtenim, especially the way it's elaborated upon in Basi Lagani, then suddenly becomes very clear. Because what's the word? We have to shift our way of looking at it. We shouldn't be looking at it that the Eibishter, who's holy and upon high, he wants that we should bring holiness, that the word is about being holy. That's how we do it. No. The word is a Dir B'Tachtenim, that the Eibishter wants his dwelling place to be in a very lowly world. And this lowly world, this Tachten, we should change it to a place that's for the Eibishter. Levels in Kedusha Shem Nishnageh, how holy we make it, already doesn't matter. The point is that the world should be a place that's a place for the Eibishter. To whatever level it is, doesn't matter. Now suddenly everything makes sense. If the Eibishter wants to have a dwelling place in the Tachtenim, we understand why the closer we get to Mashiach, we have to deal with lower and more, lower level and more klippus and more sitra achra and generations where people are less of tzaddikim. Because in order to bring Mashiach, we have to reach the absolute lowest tachten and bring that to the Eibishter. So now suddenly it makes perfect sense. We see the plan of the Eibishter, we understand what's going on, and we also understand what our role in this story is. Without this understanding, a person can tell himself, who am I? Who am I? Was bin ich? I know that I'm nothing compared to my father. I'm nothing compared to my grandfather. I'm nothing. Never mind compared to tzaddikim, even compared to regular people. Anybody, if he has his eyes open, understands and realizes that in these days, to find a yid who's reached high levels of love to the Eibishter and of dedication to the Eibishter in his heart and in his passion and in his mind and his understanding, it's not what we stand out with. It's not what we stand out with. So a person like this could say to himself, it's not for me. The program is not for me. If it's all about being holy, if the word of Mashiach is being Mashiach, is all about being heilig, ich bin nicht heilig, ich bin ayid, ich bin be'etzem heilig, good. But I can't call myself a holy person. I'm a simple person. I'm a person who struggles. I'm a person who has challenges in this world. So therefore, I'll say that my thing over here is to be a businessman, to make money, to have children, a family, a nice life, a comfortable life. Of course, I'm going to do everything according to Shulchan Aruch. I'm not looking to run away from the Eibishter. But this project of bringing Mashiach, that's for the big tzaddikim. When you understand this word, that the Eibishter wants to dir b'tachtenim, then a person's eyes become open. He starts seeing, if I'm a tachten, that means that I'm just the person who could make a dir le'yisbarech. The Eibishter can't have the tzaddik bring Mashiach on his own, because the tzaddik is in the world of holiness. He's not the tachten. The more a person realizes that he struggles and is challenged with lowly things, things that are distant from the Eibishter, things that are against Torah and Shulchan, and he's challenged with it, and he's living in it, and this is really his ma'amad u'matzav, this is his state of being, so he understands that I have the opportunity to bring the Eibishter into this lowly part of the world. And the lower I see that I'm dealing with, the more I know that I'm closer to Mashiach. The more I know that I'm closer to Mashiach. Because it's not by being holy, it's by saying wherever it is that I am, I'm going to dedicate myself as best as I could to the Eibishter. So now I took my life and I turned my life into a life for the Eibishter. Not by becoming a tzaddik. I can't become a tzaddik. But by saying that as the person that I am, I'm going to do as many mitzvahs as I could. I'm going to continue to improve. I'm going to know the truth, that it's really all about the Eibishter. It's not about me, etc., etc. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Maimer, that instead of insisting on the times of eating and drinking, and he could extend it out to whatever it is that a person has in his life, the things that he insists on, instead he'll insist on having a shir. That just like he never gives up on supper, he'll never give up on his shir Torah. He has a shir, has a chavrusa to sit down and learn Torah. That becomes something that he never touched. If he has to do it over the phone, sometimes he'll do it over the phone, but it's never touched. That's how the Frierdiker Rebbe explains to us that even as simple people who are not shaykhs to connecting to high madrigas and holiness, but by us changing our life to having a life that's dedicated to the Eibishter. So now, as a tachten, we brought the Eibishter into this world. So that's basically what was the overview from before. And now the Rebbe dedicates one more ice to continue on the general idea of Basi Lagani. And then after that, the Rebbe starts getting into the particular idea that he's discussing in this year's Maimon. So on page 880, the paragraph that starts Vihine. So what do we have until now? Until now, we have that you have a very lowly world, and Nebuch, we have to deal with it. Nebuch, we have to deal with it. It's uncomfortable, it's not good, there's no benefit in it. It's just that the Eibishter's taiva was that his place should be in this world. But there's no benefit in dealing with a lowly world. Over here, the Rebbe says a word where we actually see there actually is a benefit. So let's see what that benefit of dealing in the lowly world is. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, I understand that the Eibishter wants me to make a place for him to live in this world, so I must do the work in this world. But is there a benefit to the fact that this world is low? Other than the fact that it's the place where the Eibishter wants it to be, is there some benefit, or is it just a miserable thing that the world is a lowly place? So this is what the Rebbe explains in the next days. Through the shtus of the opposing side, of the side of the klippah, the hashaker the elam, and the lie that the world shows us, that they oppose to kedusha. So dafka through this, we awaken and we draw down the attribute of netzach, and we'll touch it soon, from above, like it says, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. Like it says in the pasuk that the Netzach, the eternity, it's a reference to the Eibishter, but over here we're referencing a particular level in Kedusha, the level of Netzach. So Netzach Yisrael, the eternity of the Yidden, lo yishaker, it doesn't fail, doesn't change, always continues and does exactly what it says that it's going to do. So we see over here a connection. We have a connection between Netzach and Sheker. The Netzach is what comes out to make sure that there shouldn't be the inyan of Sheker. So the same thing in this world, in Elam Hazeh, where you have a situation of Sheker, so Dafka over here we're able to bring to draw down and to reveal the midah of Netzach. He's going to explain at length. As the Frierdiker explains in his Hemshech, a mashal on this idea of Netzach. What's this midah attribute of Netzach? You could touch it as eternity, or in this mimer, it's more appropriate to touch it as victory. The attribute of being victorious, just like there's an attribute of kindness, an attribute of gvura, there's also an attribute of victory, of overcoming, of being triumphant. So the Frierdiker brings a mashal on this idea of Netzach being revealed in this world. He brings a mashal from a physical king, a king of flesh and blood. If there's a king who has his kingdom and nobody's opposing him, everything is very peaceful, everything is very harmonious, there is no opposition, there's no whispers of rebellion, there's no enemies, not from outside, not from inside, there's no problems. So it's not shaykh to discuss over here an idea that the king is victorious, that the king is triumphant. And instead, he leads his kingdom as he pleases, and he doesn't have to be victorious over anything, doesn't have to triumph over everything. There are no enemies to vanquish. When do you have this attribute of victory? Is dafka when there's opposition. Yes, so it's a very elementary, basic idea. It's that if you want to see by the king the idea of victory, so there has to be somebody who he's fighting against. If there's nobody who he's fighting against, then what's he's being victorious over what? What's he winning over? So why is it like this in Elam Hazeh? And here's a very geschmack way of thinking, right? You would think that this is a logical point. It's a logical point. It makes perfect sense in logic that if there's no enemy, there's nobody to be victorious over. If everybody is your friend, yeah, and assuming that you're a normal, healthy person, so you're not looking to be victorious, to destroy your friends. The idea of winning over, of conquering, of conquest, is only possible when there's an enemy. So you'd think that it's because it's a logical point. So he says, no, it's not because it's logical and it makes sense. The reason why there's such a thing like this, it's because the midah of Netzach, the attribute of victory, that's Lamaila, that's in the upper realms, that's by the Eibishter and Kedusha, is awakened dafka through opposition. And that's why it's the same thing also in this world. Because nothing in this world, not even logical, reasonable things that you think just must be, are there because they must be. It's there because the Eibishter created it. And everything that the Eibishter created was nostalgia. It evolved from what's going on in the upper worlds. And since in the upper worlds, the midah of Netzach, the attribute of Netzach by the Eibishter is always in a hidden state. It's never activated. It's never brought about. The only time that it comes out is when there's an enemy, when there's opposition. So that's why we have the same story over here in this world, where the idea of victory and of conquest is only when there is opposition. Because the Eibishter wants that the kingdom of earth should be similar to the kingdom of heaven. There's a lot of explanations in it, but the bottom line is that what we see with a physical king, the reason that it's that way is because it's a me'ain. It's a way for us to understand and to have an idea of what's going on in the upper worlds. And since Netzach, the mid of Netzach, is rooted very high, and when he says rooted very high, he adds in the parentheses, Pnimius HaKeser, Midas HaNetzach is rooted in Pnimius HaKeser. It's a you need a whole separate climber to properly learn about Pnimius HaKeser. We're familiar with it from learning in different places, but let's just say that all the other spheres exist in Atzilus. When you say Chachma, Bina, Das, right, in the Midas, the spheres live. When you say a sphere stam, you're talking about an Atzilus. There's Taka spheres and other elements. When you say a sphere stam, you're talking about an Atzilus. And where do they have their root? Where do they come from? They don't just spontaneously come into existence. Where do they come from? So B'derech Klal, for the most part, the spheres of Atzilus come into being. Their root is from the place that's immediately above Atzilus. From the place that but Chitzenius HaKeser and in Chitzenius HaKeser it's Chitzenius of Arich. In other words, it's from the place that's just above. It's just beyond Atzilus. That's where the shaders for all of the spheres is. However, Midas HaNetzach is an exception. It doesn't have its source in the place that's just above Atzilus. Instead, it has its source in the deepest madrega level of kedusha that you could possibly imagine in Pnimius HaKeser and in Pnimius HaKeser itself. In Pnimius Atik, its root is way beyond all of the other spheres. So when it comes down into this world, Chachma, Bin, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chachma, Bin, Gvura, Tiferes are all higher than Netzach. However, if you look at the root, at the source, where it came from, Midas HaNetzach actually comes from a place that's way beyond and way above all of the other spheres. So what happens now when you draw down Midas HaNetzach? Therefore, in order to be victorious over the opposition, we draw down and we reveal the treasure from above. Again, who cares? What is it that it's negea, that it's important to win the war? It's negea to Midas HaNetzachim, to Midas HaNetzach. That's to whom it's important to win the war. And Midas HaNetzach is rooted in the deepest levels in Kedusha that could possibly be imagined and thought about. That's where Midas HaNetzach is. And it's negea to this Midas HaNetzach to win the war. So therefore, if Midas HaNetzach needs to win the war, it's going to draw down treasures from this high place where it's rooted. If to win the war was only negea to the other Midas, so when there's opposition and they wants to win the war, so they'll be able to reach to where? To their own shaders. They'll be able to bring down the treasures that exist in their level, where they come from. But since it's not Chachma that's misaided, right? When somebody's challenged, it's not his attribute of Chachma that's awakened to fight. It's the Midas HaNetzach. And the Midas HaNetzach in the person, which mirrors what's going on the Maila, is rooted way up high. And it's awakened and brought about and activated to win the war. So it brings down all of the treasures that it has because of its high source. It brings down all of those deep treasures. So over here we have already the idea that the Rebbe is explaining to us of how we're supposed to feel about the world when we see that we have to deal in this very lowly world. Again, the first way, before we got to this, you could think that you have to deal with this world, which is a very lowly and miserable place to be from the point of view of a Yid who wants to do what the Eibishter wants. But he has to do it. What could he do? This is where the Eibishter wants to have his data. So this is where he has to work. Yeah, we try to bring this la prosta muscle of a plumber. Yeah, a plumber whose job is to clean sewers. So they'll charge more money than people who work at this on other things that don't involve getting, that don't require getting dirty in the most miserable type of filth that could be imagined. But it's hard to imagine that the muscle works. But the point is that there's two ways the plumber could look at it. He could either look at it and say, listen, what could I do? I'm not happy to clean sores, but what could I do? I need to make a parnasa. This is the place where I got to earn my living. And I'm very happy. It's very good for me to earn my living. I get to support my family. I get to do the things that I want. So I'll work in the sewer and I'll deal with the most filthy things that there are. Or the plumber could look at it in a different way. He could say, if this was a pleasant place to work, then I wouldn't have a job. There'd be millions of other people who would be willing to do this. Would be willing to do this. And not only that, I couldn't charge the rate that I charge. The only reason why I could charge this rate is because there are fewer people who want to do it. So b'derech mamela, I could charge more money. So I can have a comfortable livelihood. In a way, I don't know if this is a good idea, but in a way, a person could shift his thinking and see in the schmutz, he could say, instead of being, he's supposed to be revolted by it, but instead of being, brought down by it, say, this is my opportunity. Ich weiß nicht. I don't know if a healthy human being could actually bring himself to look, to looking at that. But I'm trying to use the mashal, Havdil, to try to explain the distinction between before we got to this ice and after we got to this ice. Before we got to this ice, what was the void? That the Tachteinim is a place, there's no benefit to Tachteinim. The only reason why we have to deal with Tachteinim is because that's where the job is. That's where the Eibster wants the world. That's where the Eibster wants to live. But now with this ice, we start understanding there's actually a benefit in Tachteinim. Because before you come to Tachteinim, there's no Menaget to Kedusha. There's nobody opposing Kedusha. There's nobody fighting against the Eibster. And therefore, what's revealed, Chachme, Bin, Das, all the regular standard levels are revealed. It's particularly and specifically because this world is such a miserable place. And there are people who clearly, and things, klippas, that fight against the Eibster and make life as a Yid miserable. From the goyim who physically persecute us, to the goyim who try to get involved in our education, to the goyim who make it hard for us in so many other different ways, just with the taivas that they put in front of our eyes, that constantly make us feel, that krechts that a Yid always has, that he's always failing, he's never where he is, all those klippas. All of that opposition, that precisely is what causes the midas hanetzach, the idea of being victorious, of vanquishing the enemy, of conquering him, is awakened, something that can't exist anywhere else. And that brings down with it the highest eitzis, the highest treasures of above. So it's a whole other way to feel about our experience as Yidden down here dealing with all of that garbage. So the Rebbe continues speaking it out. So let's see. As it's explained in the Hemshech of the Frierdiker Rebbe Mashal on this idea from a physical king. So he continues now discussing, going into more detail of what happens with the king of flesh and blood. And the reason why it's like this by a king down here, like we mentioned before. What do we see happens when a king wages war and he needs to win over his enemy? And let's say his enemy is a very powerful and mighty enemy. And he needs to hire large armies for an extended period of time. And he needs to arm and equip them. And his regular budget, his regular funds, his regular revenues from taxes can't sustain it. So what does he do? He hands out with an open hand all of the precious treasure that were collected over the course of many, many years. And not only that, these treasures are so precious that the family heirlooms, they were handed over from his father the king, and his father added to the collection of his father the king. This is the generational inheritance that comes only from king to king. And these treasures are extremely precious to the king. To the degree they're so precious, the king holds them with such a high regard and with so much a hadas hakedesh that he doesn't use them at all. But not only that, he doesn't even allow anybody to see them. These things are so precious that it would be beneath their honor that a regular person should be allowed to even set his eyes on them. V'hem kmusim v'chasumim ein kol reya, they are covered over and sealed away from anybody being able to see it. And that's the way it is for generations. However, what happens suddenly, nevertheless, when you have an enemy, when you have a miserable situation where there's somebody who's opposing you and rebelling against you and making life difficult for you. So now you have a situation of a war. What happens then? Not only that now he reveals the treasures, and not only that the king himself uses the treasures, the king expends them without any calculation. You could almost say in a wasteful manner. He doesn't check and measure, should he give it, should he not give it. He opens up these most treasured valuables, and he just throws them without any calculation at his army. And he hands over these treasures to the commanders. However, for who does he give it to the commanders? For Bishvil Anshe HaChayil, for the simple soldiers, like it's discussed at length in the Maimon and the Rebbe's Mamorim, that the king gives all of these treasures to the simple foot soldier who's actually holding the sword or the gun and is actually the one who needs to have food and who needs to have ammunition and needs to have training to be able to actually do the deed of winning the war for the king, of actually conquering and vanquishing the enemy. And the king gives all of this to these simple soldiers, to the foot soldiers, so that they'll be able to be victorious over the enemy. The nitzachin zeh, because this nitzachin, this victory of the soldier on the battlefield, hu nitzachin hamelech. This is actually the victory of the king. So again, the foot soldiers would never have all of this if there wasn't a situation of war. And it's the same thing in the Nimshal, that we would never have the revelations of Kedusha if not for the fact that we had to deal with all of this klippah that we're living with every day now. And the same way it is Lamaila when it comes to the Eibushter, the way he runs the world, which is where this whole mashal actually its source. That's why in the mashal it's that wicked. Now, like we mentioned earlier, there's a treasure that is hidden and sealed away that nobody can even set their eyes on it. It is the hidden of the hidden. In other words, within things that are hidden, this is the ultimate thing that's hidden. Like the Fidik Rebbe explains in his Hemshech, he calls this hidden treasure that exists in the upper worlds. He explains it that this is the idea of that the Ein Sof extends higher and higher. In other words, level upon level, without any end, to the levels of stimudu kol stimin. And this madrega and so too it extends down low, lamatamata adin tachlis, without any end. And this madrega of lamayla adin kates, in other words, the highest of the high, infinitely high. This is the Eitzer that Midas HaNetzach reveals in this world. That's why it's lamayla adin kates. There's many different levels. Starting with the sphere Samalchus, which is the Eitz Shneir Shemaim. It's not again the problem from the Maimer. And then there are higher levels after this first level of Yira of Eitz Shneir Shemaim, and then Vatla Eitzer Ha'amiti until the true and real Eitzer, the actual Eitzer, Vinina Eitzer Mavur Khan, and the Eitzer, the treasure that the Fidik Rebbe is describing in his Maimer, who Bedarga Achil Yen is the Eitzer on the highest level, the Eitzer Ha'amiti, the real Eitzer. The Eitzer Zeh, and this high madrega, this Lamayla Adin Ketz, this treasure that's ordinarily Lamayla Adin Ketz, is beyond anything that can be revealed and is beyond anything that can be experienced and drawn down into this world. So when you have a situation of klippus that oppose the Yid and try to prevent him from living his life the way he's supposed to, and from making a diddle. In other words, the Yid faces these enemies in his work of winning the war for the Eibishter. So now it says that this treasure is given, and in a way of complete open hand, without any calculation, just thrown at us, L'tzivus Hashem, to the armies of the Eibishter, Kol Echad V'Echad Misrael, Shenikraim B'Shem Tzivus Havaya. These Tzivus Hashem are every single individual Yid who is titled with the name of Tzivus Hashem, of the army of the Eibishter. Like it says in the previous parsha, Yatzu Kol Tzivus Hashem Eretz Mitzrayim, at the height of the day, in the middle of the day, all of the armies of the Eibishter left the land of Mitzrayim. Heitzi Hashem es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tziveisam. We also have the lashon that the Eibishter took out the Yidden. He redeemed the Yidden from Mitzrayim al tziveisam in their military formations. So again, the Yidden are referred to an army, the Eibishter's army. Because the Yidden leaving Galus is done in a way of a military dafke. In other words, it's this story that the Rebbe was discussing at length earlier of the war, of the battle that the Yid has to have with the Klippa and Sitra Achra, and with all of the not good that's in this world. And the Yid leaves this world by getting the powers of the Eitzris, of the treasures L'mayla that are handed to him, and therefore he goes beyond Rama Dafke. He leaves in a hand lifted up high in victory and in might. Like it says in the pasuk, and the Yidden bring about the victory, the victory of the Eibishter Melech Malchim Lachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and where is this victory? And so too, where are these highest treasures revealed? Is Dafka down here in this physical world? Since Dafka in this world is where the opposition is, so this is where the war needs to be waged, and this is where the ammunition and the armor and the training needs to be provided. So this whole story of the revelations of the highest levels of Kedusha has to come Dafka in this world, and Dafka to the foot soldiers, to the simple Yidden who are fighting to make their little area in the world a place that's for the Eibishter, even if they can't make it holy, even if they can't make themselves holy, but they connect it to the Eibishter himself, which is something even much greater, and that brings about a Didulei Sparich, Ubaylam Haza Hagashmi Gufa, and into the physical world, the material world, the Mata Mata, Aden Tachlis, all the way down here into this world. So we have the Eidin Sof, L'mayla Mayla, Aden Kates, those Eitzres, those treasures that are described as being ultimately high, L'mata Mata Aden Tachlis. They're brought down, all the way down to this Elam Haza HaTachtin, down to this physical world where they're needed, and where Midas HaNetzach says, this is where I want them to be, so that we can make a Dirulei Yisparech in this Mata Mata Aden Tachlis, that we could change the physical world to be a place for the Eibishter. But so with this, we finished the overview. With this, we finished the overview of the general outline of Basi Lagani that the Rebbe says at the opening of the Maimer. It's unusually long. Usually the Rebbe dedicates 1 or 2 ACS. Over here you have 3 ACS dedicated to an overview. And in the first 2 ACS we had the general idea of Basi Lagani of Dir B'Tachtenim. And in the ACE that we just finished, we have the idea that it's not only that we have to work in the Tachtenim, it's dafka through working in the Tachtenim that we could reveal the highest levels of Kedusha that cannot be revealed through any other way. And now the Rebbe starts focusing on the topic of the Maimer of this year of Tafshin Mem Gimmel. So we just finished saying that there's this Mata Mata where the Yid, where the foot soldier is operating this very low place, in order to understand this idea of Mata Mata Adin Tachlis, to explain what does it mean that it's so very low, just like what's above, what's high is so high, in order to help us get an idea of how low the low is. The Fidik Rebbe explains in the 13th chapter of his Hemshech of Basi Lagani Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud, the Perik Zeh, which the 13th chapter Mechuvin L'Shana Zu corresponds to this year, which is Shnas Hayid Gimmel B'Pam Hashniya. When the Rebbe said it, it was the 13th year, and the second time around, and this time is the 13th year, and the fourth in the fourth time around. Pratei Hadargas Shabazeh, the detailed levels that there is in the Mata Mata Adin Tachlis. Maschil me'elemis biyad kedusha, beginning from the elements of biyah of kedusha. In other words, you have four elements in kedusha. You have atzilus, bria, yitzira, asiyah. Atzilus is not called a bria; it's not called a creation. Instead, it's called atzilus milashin etzle v'samachloi or milatzen hatzalah v'hafrasha. In other words, it's not that something new was created. It's merely an extension, a continuation of the Eibishter. We call it an Elam, so it has a form. And if you're saying that it has a certain form, a certain shape, so you understand already that you're not dealing with the Madegas of Ein Sof, and that's why we call it an Elam. However, it's not a creation. It's not separate, Chas v'Shalom, from the Eibishter. Atzilus is one with the Eibishter. And then we have the first Yerid. The first Yerid is from Atzilus to Biyah. Starts over here a story of Biyah, of the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah. Like the first world tells us it's a Bria. The part over here is that it's a creation. In other words, before that, it wasn't, because there was only the Eibush there. And now it is. In other words, something that's Kivyachal, not the Eibush, that came into existence. So this is already the first Yerida. The first Yerida. The ad, Shali Deiri, Tzimtzumim, and the Frierdiker Rebbe spends a good more than half a page on this. Through many Tzimtzumim, Mishavim Gam Elam Istalumas, you also end up having not only the worlds of Biyah, which are creations, which are Kivyachol not one with the Eibishter, but they are worlds of holiness. You end up stooping lower and you end up having worlds of Lu'umas, the worlds of opposition that are not on the side of the Eibishter. However, even in this, you have several different levels, starting from the more spiritual levels. We just had yesterday in Tanya that because the more spiritual levels aren't embodied in a corporal, physical guf, so therefore they have still some level of awareness in the Eibishter. And then you get down to the worlds of Lu'um Hazeh in Gashmis Ha'ilim. And even there's many different madrigas. The Adla Klippas Pare, and the Frierdiker Rebbe takes it down all the way to the lowest klippa, the klippa of Pare, which are described in the Parshias of Boy and the Parshias before that. Sha'amar, which Pare said, Li Yo'eri Vani Yosisani, the Nile River belongs to me, and I'm actually its creator. The Frierdiker Rebbe explains in his Maimer how this is the ultimate level of denial of Kedusha. Why? Because how was Pare able to make this claim? That it should have any Mokim and Metzias, any believability that he created the Nilus? Because every time he would walk over to the Nilus would rise to him and overflow. So he said, you know why it's rising and filling up all the channels, the irrigation channels, that are required to grow all of the food from its time. You know why this is happening? Because I made it. I'm its boss. I created it. And that's why it rises towards me. What's the truth, though, that Pari knew and that we all know, is that the reason that this was happening was the bracha that Yaakov Avinu gave him. In other words, this is a keich of Kedusha that the Eibishter gave to Pari, that the waters of the Nilus should rise to him. And instead of saying what you're experiencing over here with the Nilus rising, is a vart of Kedusha, is a vart of saying that the Eibishter is in charge of the world. And if he wants the waters to rise, they're going to rise. Instead of that, what does Pare do with this gift that he got from the Eibishter? He turns that into, and that's how he becomes an Avodah Zarah. He uses that itself to power himself as a Getchka. So this level of denial, of having the chutzpah to take the holiness itself and use that to build for yourself an Avodah Zarah, that level is the ultimate lowest level. We can connect this with the many madrigas. In other words, these various madrigas of lumas that you have in the world, we can connect it to the various madrigas of shtus that you have in a person. That are described earlier in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer. The haschala, which the beginning of a person's downfall is kamuv like was mentioned in the second ace of this Maimer that we learned in the previous year. Rak hataya bulvad. It starts off with a very subtle, almost unfelt change in a person, that the person veers in the most minute and almost indiscernible way. he departs from the correct and straight path. Netiyah rak kechut hasayra. He turns just the amount, just a hairbreadth, a nothing. Umizehu yered lamata yeser. However, when a person does that, he can find himself that he ends up falling even further down. Achanasa mushkrach man letzlan betayvis, until the person is completely consumed by and subsumed in his taivis. However, these taivis are still taivis of heter. These are not things that directly contradict Shulchan Aruch. He's just completely into his taivis. Umizehu balidi the gedel lamata yeser. From this, he ends up in an even greater descent. Until it's possible for him to even do something that is absolutely not allowed, that is impermissible by Shulchan Aruch. And even in this, there are several different levels. In the beginning, he does this because he enjoys it. In other words, he's not looking to fight against the Eibishter. He's looking he's doing these Avedas simply because he enjoys them. However, afterwards, the person can fall even further down. A person becomes rebellious, and he does the things that he's doing to spite, to anger the Eibishter. Since the Eibishter placed the world, the entire universe, into the heart of man, what does it mean? Yeah, in the Pirush HaPashat, it's a very geschmack of art that the Eibishter placed the entire universe into the heart of man. In other words, a person is unique in that he's able to imagine and envision and interpret and understand the entire universe. We could stand over here and we could look at galaxies, we could look at star systems, we could see the entire, all the earth sciences, the way all of the forces that work on Earth work. The person, a human being his existence is merely not even a speck in the universe, is able to hold within him and see within him and give meaning to the entire universe, to the oceans and to the skies and to the galaxies, to all the stars that are in them. Gamma Sa'il, the entire universe, they are placed in the heart of man. You make of it what you want. However, in Chassidus, there's an even deeper explanation. That's not only that we can interpret it, that we could give it meaning, that we could see it, we can envision it, we can understand it. It's much more. We actually determine what happens in all of it. Gamma Sa'elam, nasan belibam, that the Eibishter placed whatever happens in the entire universe, the Eibishter placed it in the heart of man, that it's up to us what's going to happen and how the world is going to look. So it's literally placed in our heart. We're in control of it. We manage it. We lead it. Move on. So according to this, it's understood that if there's all these low madrigas of klippa that a person can find himself in, that all of these madrigas of shtus and lumas that are found in the person, you also have in the world, until the very lowest klippa of liyari, that the river belongs to me and I created it, which this is what's born of and what corresponds to a person who doesn't have Veda to spite the Eibishter. Or rebellion against the Melech Malchim Malchim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against the Eibishter himself. So what do we have from this Maimer, from this Eis? We have that there's a relationship between the klippos in the world and the klippos that are by a person, right? In other words, we have from this ice over here that the Ein Sof is Lamata Mata Adein Tachlis, that the world extends very, very low. There's very low places in the world. But they have also inserted another idea over here that he spent a few lines on, that there's a connection between what goes on in a person and what happens in the world. And not only that, what happens in the world is an outcome of what the person does within himself. And the Rebbe is going to use that a lot, as this idea. I don't know if the Rebbe ever comes back to it and speaks about it explicitly, but this idea that all of the klippos in the world are in our hands. It's up to us to make of it what we decide to make of it, because we lead it, and it's b'leiv ha'adam. It's within our heart and within our control to do to it what is necessary. That the Rebbe continues the whole rest of the Maimer to show us what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. And we'll just start with a few lines from the next ice. We'll complete the share with a few lines from the next dice. We have to understand why in Chassidus it's explained the Maimer Zeh in this Maimer, in other words, in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, Ubaid Maimarim, and in several other Maimarim, Ha'inin de Lamata Mata Baruch Beplatius Kolkach. Why does he go into such great detail into the Lamata Mata? Why is that necessary? Until even in the Eitz Chaim, towards the end, there's two dedicated gates, two sections in the Eitz Chaim that are dedicated to Mevayim Plotei Adargis to Klippus. They explain the details of the different levels of Klippus. The Gam Lifnei Zeh B'Zohar, and even before the Eitz Chaim, in the Zohar we have the Kama Mekemis, V'Fat Parshas Pekudim and Vur Barichas Gedele B'Plotei Pratius in Yonim Elu at great length, and going into the minutia, going into the details of all of these lowly klippus and low places that exist within the world. And that was asking why. It's a simple question. It's such a powerful question. What good does it do? What good does it do? If so,
because what the whole thing is dealing with tachtenim, and in order to get that's why was Matan Torah after Mitzrayim? Like why wasn't Matan Torah by Abraham? Because the world wasn't ready yet then to do the Shiva B'Sayim. And we had to go into the Mata and then Tachlis, and that's the only way you get.
Yeah. So talk B'Chlolis, you're right, and let's talk along the lines of what he's discussing in the Maimer, but there's so much more to understand in that. And l'chora, you could say that what's missing from your answer that the Rebbe is going to, we'll see the Rebbe addresses, why is it necessary that should be in Torah?
Well, you have to discuss it.
Yeah, why is that? Not everything has to be condoned. Yeah, we all raise children. Some of us are in the middle of raising children, some of us finished. And there's some things that you see your kids do. That it comes partially because they're young and they have to grow older. So you turn a blind eye. Right? There's some things that you have to address. You have to teach them and guide them. And there's some things that you'd rather not magnify. You'd rather not place an emphasis on. And you're confident it's going to go away on its own. So therefore you could turn a blind eye, make like you didn't see it, instead of turning it into a whole topic by the Shabbos table and discussing and describing how bad it is when this, not everything is necessary to whatchamacallit. Yeah. It's not necessary to get into the nitty gritty of all the bad. Especially also in simple psychology. If a person is trying to overcome his challenges and his issues, a simple advice you could give to somebody is, don't dwell on it. Just don't dwell on it. Just move on. So why are we dwelling on it? So why it exists, so you proposed a good answer that it serves some purpose, and like we learned in this Maimer also, there has to be a dira b'tachtenim. But why do we find that it's necessary to put it in Torah? Okay, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll learn weiter.
Yeah.